So my scanner anomaly for this week is called Bad Medicine. CIG, your love is like bad medicine. No, that's not what this is about.
Are you saying we're
So
gonna be able to administer bad drugs in the system? Are we gonna be able to make
yes,
diseases?
gosh, I hope so.
They've already
I hope
confirmed it.
so.
So
Yeah.
when they were talking about the Endeavor, they're basically like, "Hey, we want you to build drugs and possibly even diseases."
hmm
I'll be right back. So
Um,
you do your thing.
so when I was on Captain's Table with on Astropub with Paul Shelley and Atira Kell, we talked a lot about logistics and um, yeah, logistics is something that is intrinsic within any organization, within any corporation now, and it's especially a big deal within the military, regardless of which military. But it was something that we brought up because it's a big deal for what Atira and I both do in the military, and so we did talk about that and how that's working right now, how we think it'll work in the future. Um, but it made me think a lot about medical logistics because we also talked about, and we got off on a tangent for some reason about the Carrick and Tier 2 medical bays and being able to regenerate within them or respawn. Um, and the care tier 2 medical bays like on the Carrick, like on the 890 jump, like on the now the Odyssey and the Banded Merchantman, and in all the Lagrange points, however you want to say it, stations. I do. This is a hill that I'm willing to die on, just like the Hercules and the Liberator not being dropships. I do not think that tier 2 medical beds will be for regeneration. And I think the reasoning for that has a lot to do with logistics. And so I wanted to talk about medical gameplay, death and regeneration, and medical logistics within Star Citizen. And so this might be a little bit long, but I think it's going to have a lot of interesting information. And I've got a lot of good citations. So if you're listening to this later, go back and look at the show notes and read through the links that I have in the show notes that I'm going to be picking some pieces out of in order to frame what I'm talking about. And so this all starts way back with the Death of a Spaceman article, which was literally written by Chris Roberts himself back in February of 2013. So
I
only
would like
like
to put
5 or 6 months.
a
Yeah, go
quotation
for it.
asterisk on that entire article. It was written by Chris Roberts. Chris Roberts is a director.
Yeah.
He has employed designers, so the content of this may have been, we'll call it, adapted to
hmm
modern games.
Yes.
Chris is
Yeah.
not
Death
a
of a
designer.
Spaceman has not gone away.
No.
It has evolved.
And
People think that now that we have regeneration, that Death of a Spaceman is no more.
no.
And no. It has just simply evolved into something different because the original concept was a bit too hardcore.
It's the difference
And so,
between survival Minecraft and hardcore Minecraft. Where
yeah,
hardcore you get a single life, which was the original Death of a Spaceman, and now you just have to, well, eventually you will completely die off. But you need to go back and get your stuff now.
hmm
So, and also, all through the years, I don't know how much you actually quote back to it, but Tony Zervik specifically, mostly recent, last 3 years at least, has said Death of the Spaceman is ironically still alive.
yeah,
So,
yeah. It is still very much alive because much of the concepts within Death of a Spaceman, within the original article, are still alive. They're still part of the gameplay. They're part of the gameplay now. They're part of the design of the game in the future. The only thing that is different is that in between actually your character actually dying in between you and your character actually dying is regeneration. All they've inserted regeneration in between the death of a spaceman and you being alive. And so I picked a few quotes out of Death of a Spaceman that I thought were pretty poignant, and I'm just going to offer some comments on them. This is not going to be a all exclusive diatribe on all things medical gameplay. I'm going to cover a lot of it, but just the more specific bits to what we're trying to talk about. The sort of the gist of how medical gameplay and death works in Star Citizen, and why it's important, and why logistics is important to Star Citizen. So Chris says in Wing Commander or Privateer, which are Chris Roberts games, it's from way back when, huge fans of those. You had to complete the mission to move on. There was no mid-mission saves. This created a sense of anxiety towards the end of the mission if you were badly damaged and your shields were low. But if you managed to limp home successfully, you felt a sense of accomplishment. Without the risk of losing something you've worked hard towards, the sense of achievement is cheap. So in essence, Chris Roberts wants there to be risk, permanence, and loss. We kind of already have that in game right now,
Especially if you're a hauler.
If your ship takes damage, if your character has an injury, and you're trying to get through the mission, you can't save in the PU. You can't do anything about that. You just either have to quit the mission and go back and get repaired, or or healed up, or you have to press on and get by the skin of your teeth. And that's an important part of Star Citizen. And it's we're barely scratching the surface of that right now with what we have in game, because there's a lot of parallels between your ship and your character, and repair and healing, and absolute destruction and death. The simple solution is that when your ship is destroyed, this is another quote, you manage to eject and drift in space, where you are picked up and returned to the last planet landing location to claim your new ship, sans any cargo and upgrades you had, unless you had bought additional insurance, and head out into space again. And so this is talking about, the idea isn't, we've dealt with this for so long, where your ship blows up, um, and you die. Your ship blowing up isn't a slow thing. It's all of a sudden. I mean, you're taking damage, and then kaboom. There's no incapacitation, and that's just a limitation of the game right now, um, because it's not fleshed out. But the goal has always been where your ship isn't going to randomly just explode once it reaches a low health point, a low level of health. You're going to become disabled, and then you can't go any further. And you can eject and drift in space, but the idea is that your ship will not be destroyed, and you can be rescued. It's the same thing with your character. The idea is for you to become damaged to the point, injured to the point where you become incapacitated, and then you have to wait for rescue, someone to come and get you. And this is why working together with other people is so important, so that you have somebody who can come and rescue you. But we'll get more into that later. That's why I picked this quote. It's, you're either rescued or recovered and returned to the hospital landing zone, of your choice, using the beacon system. And we'll get more into the beacon system as well. Next quote. This is a mechanic EVE Online uses, with the extra wrinkle that if another player blows up your escape pod, a stored clone of your character is activated, respawning your character and effectively making him/her immortal. In EVE, death is allowed for in the fiction, and is balanced out by the cloning mechanism, which allows for loss of property but not your character's skills, as unlike Star Citizen, your character in EVE has RPG skills that you learn. The death mechanic in EVE is clever and well woven into their fiction, but I'm not interested in making EVE 2.0 with cockpits. So what was originally planned is, if if you eject from your ship in space combat, or if somebody, or if you're downed in FPS combat and the other player comes along and executes you, in EVE, you have a clone, and they just make a new clone of you. Well, originally with Death of a Spaceman, if somebody, finishes you, then you would essentially, your belongings would be willed to a new character, and you'd have to, basically roll a new character, create a new character. And this is walked back somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat, with regeneration. And we'll get to regeneration a little bit. But regeneration isn't cloning, because regeneration comes at a cost to your character. And so instead of cloning you and you have a new copy of you, you have you've basically imprinted your saved consciousness onto a new body, but that body has taken damage or is not the same as your old body, because it retains aspects of your old body due to how you died, and whether you were injured prior to dying. And so you're not getting a fresh copy. You're getting um, your consciousness imprinted onto um, a a body that has some wear and tear from the get go, because of the way imprinting and regeneration works. But you can also only regenerate so many times before you actually do big die, just like in the original Death of Spaceman. And so you can still big die once you're unable to regenerate any further. So Death of a Spaceman still exists. There's just sort of a temporary and limited stopgap between you and actual death, permadeath. The next quote, main quote from Death of a Spaceman is, "When you venture out into space proper, you do put your character at risk, but it will be a long-term one, not an immediate one. I see each character you play having the ability to die multiple times. Still a thing with regeneration. That's the point. Multiple times before the character is finally put to rest. Think of this like lives in an old school arcade game. Science in the future is far more advanced than today. Medicine has the ability to bring people back from what would be considered dead in today's world." And so originally with Death of a Spaceman, your character would essentially suffer catastrophic injury, and your body would be recovered and you could be brought back to life. There were systems that would make it so that way the medicine, it was essentially a way of saying that the medicine is so advanced that what we think of as death and a catastrophic, fatal injury wasn't so with Death of a Spaceman. So that is still there. The medical gameplay and the advanced medicine in Star Citizen to enable Death of a Spaceman hasn't gone away. They've just added regeneration on top of that. So you can still have a catastrophic injury and be severely injured, but then as long as you aren't dead, as long as you don't take a fatal blow, medicine, within Star Citizen can save you and prevent you from having to regenerate. Now you may still, and you should be able to get fully healed, I guess, to an extent. But that was the other big part of that quote, is that Chris Roberts really wants there to be risk, and he wants that risk to scale across the universe. The risk that you take on flying around and doing missions in Stanton is not going to be nearly the risk that you take on if you go out to, Tiber looking for wealth and glory to fight against the Van Duel, or you go to Null and you're dealing with pirates and slavers in a system that's 120 AU across. He wants there to be risk, but it to be to have it be, be in relation. You assume risk, but that risk is, on a scale. And so, if you don't want to take too much risk, you don't have to. But if you want the bigger reward, you have to assume the bigger risk. So yeah, we're not only can you survive more grievous injuries, and you're much better protected from injury in the Star Citizen universe with ships that don't magically explode. They become disabled, where you have body armor and spacesuits that protect you and your internal organs from injury, to the point where you can be shot multiple times, many times, and be around explosions, and you get downed. You don't get killed, and then you're downed, and you have hours, for somebody to come and rescue you. So but you can, all this means that you have a lot of stopgaps in between you and the big die. But yeah, like I said, Death of a Spaceman hasn't gone away. It's just been expanded and added onto, but the original concept is still there. And so there's a question and answer section at the bottom of this com link from way back when. And one of the questions was, what qualifies as a death? And Chris Roberts very bluntly answers, not ejecting before your spaceship blows up. So your ship can still blow up if it takes enough damage, or if it's damage in the absolute wrong spot, it can blow up, but it will take a long time to get there. You'll know well ahead of time if it's going to blow up, or if you take a headshot, and not just a headshot with a helmet, that your helmet has been destroyed or you're not wearing one, and you take a headshot to your unprotected dome piece. You can take a headshot in the game right now and it won't kill you. It will just down you. That's a severe traumatic brain injury. Quick tangent. The reason I'm passionate about this, the reason I'm interested in it so much, and the reason why I think that the context with the real world is important, and we'll get to some of that later, is because I'm a career paramedic and flight paramedic on both civilian and military. I was an infantry marine way back when, but I've been in emergency and critical care medicine, and transport medicine, and remote medicine for like 16 years now. And the amount of parallels between the way Star Citizen does things and the way things are designed in the real world are uncanny. And I think because a lot of people don't know about how these things work in the real world, they sort of dismiss things that are not explicitly said in Star Citizen, even though there's a lot of pretty strong hints into the way things will work. Nazareth, did I lose you on audio? Do I still have you?
I'm here.
Yep. Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out all this crap. We're almost 10 minutes, or somewhere near 10 minutes or more behind because of all the buffering. Yeah, got to call him tomorrow. Yippee! Like, it's doing the exact same thing it used to do. It'll fluctuate.
Stupid interwebs.
Oh man, it's not going to 0 as much, but it's going down to 3,000 kilobits.
Oh geez.
Yeah.
But yeah, so death is a very specific thing, and this list that Chris mentions isn't all inclusive, but it's demonstrative of what death is. Not ejecting before your ship blows up, so you're blown to smithereens. Taking a headshot, an unprotected headshot during boarding. Having your ejected pilot or escape pod targeted and destroyed while floating in space. Basically, you have to have catastrophic destruction of your body, or your catastrophic destruction of your vital organs in order to actually die. Um, and before you get there, you'll most likely be incapacitated and have a tier 1 injury. We'll get to injuries here in a second. So the next step, leading on from death of a spaceman, because we talked about this briefly, is regeneration. And regeneration was introduced pretty recently, with let's see, when did let me find the date. The date for the actual comlink for regeneration was September 21st, 2021. So just not even a year ago. But this came with Healing Tier 0 and Alpha 315 is when they introduced regeneration, the concept and the lore behind it. And I have the link to the Lore Maker's Guide to Regeneration. It is very important. I think it's really important that everybody read it to really understand what regeneration is, because a lot of people ignore the lore. You can't ignore the lore. Lore influences gameplay, and there are pieces of the lore that are already incorporated in the gameplay, and there are pieces of the lore that have yet to be incorporated. But it's all going to be a thing. It's not just backstory fluff. It's how the game will work. And so I'm just going to read a few quotes and put things into context from that lore maker's guide. The first one says, to coincide with this brand new gameplay, the narrative team has been working on some brand new lore. While we always knew that medical science would be advanced enough to bring you back from the brink of death. Bring you back from the brink of death. This is important. It was during the recent development period that it was decided that players would benefit from being able to come back even if their avatar's body was completely lost. So instead of with Death of a Spaceman, where you get the big die if your body's just completely lost, completely, insurvivable injuries, you're exploded into a million bits, your brain is splattered all over the back of your helmet, your internal organs become your external organs, all that. and so, but that's still going to be a part of the game. But instead of big die, you roll a new character. Now you're going to regenerate. But if you don't do if you're not subjected to something that would cause the big die, as described here, you can be, the advanced medicine in the 30th century of Star Citizen can bring you back from the brink of death. That's what medical gameplay is all about. Well, that and anything below that. So in short, you're going to have to try really hard to, it not with the alpha, not with the game as it is right now, where you can fall down some stairs or a ramp and suffer a catastrophic injury. With the when the game is working as intended. So in short, you're going to have to try hard to receive a catastrophic injury, where you'll actually die, because the overwhelming majority of the times where you die right now in game, and right now in Alpha 317.2, you get injuries, pretty commonly. You get downed and then you get an injury. But that's because they're working towards this. The overwhelming majority of the time, instead of actually dying, you'll receive an injury. And you'll have to really screw up or be really unlucky to have a catastrophic injury, or incident where that actually causes you to die and then regenerate. The next important quote: while a lot of scenarios could have explained away by diligent NPC emergency response teams, finding injured players and bringing them back to civilization, with a game like Star Citizen, there were a lot of cases where even the bravest ambulance pilots wouldn't have been able to retrieve you. So a lot of people are, um, not dead set against this, but they think that it's only going to be players doing medical missions, and it's only going to be players rescuing you. And if a player doesn't come get you, you're up a creek without a paddle. Well, we know that the quantum economy and the quantum system exists. We know that there's quanta, and that quanta do things like act as pirates and security forces and haulers. They also act as miners. The AI NPCs will be providing will be act as emergency response teams within Star Citizen. It's going to be a thing. And if you're downed on a planet somewhere and you put up a beacon requesting help, a player may come get you, an NPC may come and get you. Case in point, right now with the NPC reinforcement system, a Cutlass Black lands and drops off troops who run over and attack you. It is not a stretch to imagine a Cutlass Red landing nearby and a couple of medics coming in, hitting you with the med gun, carrying you back to the Cutlass Red, and transporting you back to, you know, Maria Pure of Heart or whatever hospital you so choose. Or, and this is foreshadowing to later on in the conversation, if you're someplace out in the middle of nowhere, transporting you back to a Endeavor Hope class, that is in system providing medical support where there is none, because it is a thing. We'll get to that. Yeah, so it isn't just players. It's going to be Quanta and Quantum doing this, and retrieving you and getting you back to civilization, getting you back to an actual hospital or a clinic to get the medical care, or a hospital ship. But what they're referring to as well is that there are going to be edge case situations, and CIG is totally referring to these, as these aren't going to be the common things, where you pilot your ship into a star, or full tilt into an asteroid at 1,000 meters a second or something like that. Or if somebody straight up ghosts you. There are going to be instances where you do have the big die, but the majority of the time that is not going to be the case in the way the game is intended and designed and should be eventually, not the buggy alpha that we're used to. Next, very important and poignant quote: since we needed regeneration to be fairly commonplace and widespread in 2951 in order to match the gameplay. It says fairly commonplace and widespread. Fairly. It is not everywhere. It is not exceedingly common. The point of the game is still to not die. because regeneration is still meant to be a significant inconvenience. They just want to make it so that it's not an end game scenario where you have to roll a new character. They want you to, there to be a sense of permanence with your relationship with your character, and so they want you um, to go and get healed. They want you to, not push forward and get yourself killed or do things that are reckless, and avoid consequence. That's the point. Part of the point of this is because if you regenerate and, um, you can only regenerate so many times, but also, if you have to regenerate and the closest place you can regenerate from is far from where you were, it's a big inconvenience. Your ship, your equipment, everything that was on you is back where you actually died, and you have to go and retrieve it and travel all that way. And the only way to avoid that is to plan for that inconvenience, which is going to be costly. And we'll get to that more when we talk about the medical logistics. Um, So, following that, next quote within the Lore Maker's Guide to Regeneration. In 2949, the first successful regeneration of a human occurred using a rapid bioprinting technology created by Bioticor and the imprint information stored on an Ibrahim sphere. Recognizing this breakthrough's potential, Imperator Addison authorized trillions of credits into making the technology as widely available as possible. Not widely available, as widely available as possible, going so far as to make the specifications for the Ibrahim sphere public so that multiple companies could produce the scanners and bioprinters needed. Today, and this is the biggest part of this, today, while the regeneration process remains costly, even the lowliest space station is equipped with an imprint capable medical scanner, and billions of lives have been saved. Notice the separation between the part of the sentence that says, today, while the regeneration process remains costly, even the lowliest space station is equipped with an imprint capable medical scanner, and billions of lives have been saved. So instead of people dying the big die, um, by maintaining an imprint, people are allowed to regenerate and have 9 lives. You're a cat now.
I.
Congratulations, everybody's a space cat. We're like the Kilrathi, right? The Kilrathi from
Mm-hmm.
Wing Commander.
Meow.
We're all space cats now. Meow. Um, but that separation is really important and something that a lot of people gloss over when they think that regeneration is just going to be everywhere. You're going to regenerate it, be able to regenerate at every tier 2 bed in the verse. No, regeneration is costly. It is the imprinting part of the equation that is widespread and, able to be found at every space station. Imprinting, and using an Ibrahim sphere is the equivalent of having a CT scan nowadays. CT scanners or CAT scanners are everywhere. Um, there are CAT scanners in, most urgent cares don't have them, but CAT scanners in every ER. Basically, you have to have access to a CAT scanner to be in an emergency room. They're in a lot of, outpatient clinics and outpatient facilities. They're in every hospital, regardless of how big, or small. Just about every hospital has a CT scanner, unless it's an ultra rural one. And it's because the scanning and creating of your imprint using an Ibrahim sphere is the important part, because all it's doing is updating your imprint. And I'm not going to get into too much detail about what imprinting is and your imprint viability score, but the idea is that the game is going to encourage you to maintain your imprint. The longer you go without imprinting before, and then, you say you've gone a long time, since your last imprint, and then you big die and you have to regenerate. Um, the worse that is for your imprint viability score and your regenerated person. And so by imprinting more frequently and having higher quality imprints from a higher quality Ibrahim sphere, like on a tier 1 bed versus a tier 2, you essentially have more lives. You are a cat with 12 lives instead of 9. Um, and if you do use one of those lives, you're a cat without a limp instead of having a limp. You're a cat with full stamina like you're 5 instead of you're 13. We're going to keep using this cat analogy, metaphor, whatever you want to call it.
And
I
they
can never
haven't
remember.
actually said what the where or what differentiates a who will have a higher tier Ibrahim sphere, right? They said it will be a thing, but they haven't dictated exactly what that's going to function like in game.
No, the only thing. Let's see.
Because I know they said it was different, but they haven't said like, is a station going to have a lesser quality? Is a pirate station going to have a lesser quality specifically?
I think it's going to be because you're going to be imprinting in medical beds.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to be the quality um, of the tier of the med bed. We don't know if there's going to be different types of med beds, like this one's made by the medical equivalent of Drake or Castec Arms, and this one's the medical equivalent of Origin. Um, but there is, it does say under the Ibrahim sphere part, I'm just going to read through it real quick, the technology inside medical beds and scanners that allows them to create and store imprints made out of advanced materials that are alien in origin. The technology behind the spheres was made public to encourage mass production and development. The technology behind the spheres was made public to encourage mass production and development. It is important to note that not all spheres are created equal. Higher quality spheres are better able to preserve imprints and cause less trauma during the regeneration process, allowing for more cycles before viability failure. Um, so there's a lot of really important stuff to take into account here, and that's why it's so important to read these things. It is not just fluff. Um, but the big thing to take away from all this is that regeneration is costly. It's going to cost, whether you're paying for the process of regeneration. If you have to regenerate, it's going to cost you a lot of money in UAC. If you are providing regeneration with your tier 1 bed, I'm going to come right out and say it, with your tier 1 bed, the regeneration is going to be costly in terms of resources. It's going to be much more cost effective and efficient, whether it's you paying for it or you providing it, to heal someone or to be healed, than it is to regenerate. You're going to want to avoid having to regenerate. It's just a last resort stopgap. Um, if you cannot be healed. So yeah, it's um, my comments on this is regeneration is costly in terms of money and resources. So it makes sense that you wouldn't be able to regenerate at every medical bed or in every location. It's just like how we have now. And I have at the bottom of my show notes, I have an example. The tier 1, 2, and 3 beds, it mirrors almost exactly along tier 1, 2, and 3 beds, along with your handheld medical care, what you can do using your character, with your med gun and stuff, mirrors almost exactly the roles, what we call in the military, which is US military and NATO, the roles of medical care: role 1, role 2, role 3. um, and we even have rule 4, but as well as trauma center levels in the US, and there's other countries that use them, level 1, level 2, level 3. And we don't talk, in my line of work, we don't talk about level 4. It's not really even a thing. Level 4 is what you can do by hand, essentially. um, in that you the only thing is the military is inverse, whereas the higher number is better, whereas the civilian side, it's the lower number the better. But the relationship is still the same, in that because having that higher level of care and capability is so costly in terms of resources and personnel, they're put in strategic locations in order to provide the most benefit. um but it just means, and this is why people like me exist. This is my whole job. This is my what I do, is I move people who are, I either pick them up from the point of injury, or where they are ill, and I take them to the appropriate level of care, or I take them from a level of care that isn't appropriate to the a higher level of care that is. And that's why in Stanton, you have tier 2 beds at all the clinics in the Lagrange point stations because and we're going to get into this in a second. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. You want to have easy access to the level of care that applies to the majority of the injuries and illnesses that you're going to see. That you want that to be readily available. But because the big die and the tier 1 injuries are not going to be common, you don't want to have that everywhere because it's a drain in resources, and there's more evidence to support that as we get into this. Um, but yeah, so that's the highlights of the Lore Maker's Guide to Regeneration. So again, I highly encourage you to read it. Read it like 3 times because it will make more sense the more times you read it. But that's part of my case for why tier 2 beds aren't going to be for regeneration, but they're still invaluable for what we were going to be doing in Star Citizen. Um, Moving on, and this next comm link is from 2018, from when the Apollo was released in like August. But it remains it's still accurate. Not nothing's really changed because it's just talking about medical gameplay, not regeneration. And so I put a screenshot of something that's in there, and I'm just going to read through it. But this is in the show notes. So it says, in the future, planet-side medical locations and medical ships will bring different tiers of healing to the universe. Tier 1, recover from near-death experiences and fatal injuries. This is the equivalent of a level 1 trauma center in civilian medicine, here in the U.S. Or it's basically the equivalent of a roll 3/roll 4 in the military, where you have definitive care and definitive treatment. They can, and basically you can stop the dying and completely treat and heal whatever's going on. Tier 2, recover from serious injuries such as multiple limb bleed outs and or ruined limbs. And so, if you've been shot in the arms or something like that, or your arms are taking, explosive damage, your tier 2 bed can fully recover your limbs from these things. So if you have a serious injury to your limbs, this can take care of it. Um, but it's more than that, and we'll get into that here in a second. But it just talks more specifically about ruined limbs. But the other thing is, you're wearing body armor and you have more armor. If you look at the armor that you're wearing with your vests, you are much better protected around your core, just like we wear now, and around your head with your helmet than you are your limbs. You are much more likely to suffer a limb injury than a central body injury because the way it's designed is so that you can take multiple hits on your armor and not get injured. Your armor will degrade and let you know, hey, you've been, shot 5 or 6 times, and if you get shot again, it's gonna break through and cause an injury, but it'll still slow it down, that sort of thing. It's the same. It's meant to be similar to ship armor. We don't have it in game, but we know how it's supposed to work, how it's supposed to prevent your ship from taking damage until it fails, but it's supposed to let you know. Oh, and um, the Twitch is just letting me know. It says, "Thanks for following Paraland Flyer," and Paraland Flyer is actually an IRL friend of mine and a fellow flight clinician. He's a flight paramedic and flight nurse that works with my wife, and
Ah,
he's actually crashing in my in our guest room that's on the other side of the wall. So he's
ah,
listening through the wall right now.
So he knows exactly how far behind we are.
Yes, yeah, he's a fellow Uber nerd. Um,
Nice.
he's he might comment here in a second and be like, "Hell yeah, I am." Um, But so this next quote is going to extrapolate on what I just talked about with the tier 1, 2, and 3 beds. And so while some injuries won't fully heal until the player has received the correct level of treatment, the more basic medical facilities will still be able to keep non-fatally injured players alive and stop bleeding. However, it is not recommended for any injured player to stay in a semi-injured state for too long, as there will be consequences such as reduced stamina. Um, Staying in a damaged state for a long time will also make you weaker against further damage, so it should always be a priority to heal yourself as soon as possible to prevent further mishaps. While some injuries won't fully heal until the player has received the correct level of treatment, the more basic medical facilities will still be able to keep non fatally injured players alive and stop bleeding. So, if you are downed, and this is what this is saying, and I'm going to take a hard stance on this. I don't think we need CIG to spell it out any more than that. But if you're downed and you have a tier 1 injury, your chest armor broke and you got shot in the chest, and you have a tier 1 injury, a tier 2, you can get um, medical stabilization with a med gun, to give you, basically give you more blood and to help slow the bleeding down and to treat the pain, and get moved to a tier 2 bed or even a tier 3 bed. And depending on what level of bed it is, even if you have a tier 2 or tier 3 bed, it will be able to stabilize you to an extent. So if you get to a tier 2 bed, say on your Carrack or your Banu Merchantman, your 890 jump, whatever, or you get brought to a space station in remote space because there isn't a landing zone hospital in that system, or isn't one nearby, you can get treated and you won't die, but you'll just have, you'll essentially have like a tier 2 injury, with the negative, some sort of debuff, that we all know from every RPG everyone's ever played. You're going to have a debuff until you get fully healed, but you won't die. You're not going to, the dying process will have stopped. They'll have stopped the bleeding. Um, but once you get treated, you won't die. You're just going to have that debuff until you get the appropriate level of treatment. So you'll have a tier 2 bed, treats your tier 1 injury, essentially downgrades it to a tier 2 injury, but can't downgrade it any further. And then you need to at some point get to a tier 1 bed to remove the debuff. So you can run around and complete the mission. If you had to get evac, a ways back to your Apollo with only tier 2 med beds. You could do something like that. Or your tier 3 bed on your Cutlass Black is able to stabilize you so you don't die, but you have a more severe debuff. So maybe you can walk, but you can't run. You can't even jog, and you can't carry stuff or something. Okay, at least you're going to live, and you can make it until you make it back to more definitive level of care. But you're not going to waste the regen, and you're not going to lose all your gear someplace. That's the goal of medical gameplay. And that's the goal, is to incentivize you to, hey, I just got, healed or at least treated, and it only cost me this much, versus having to spend, add a 0 or more in order to get regenerated. And we're going to get more into that. And so the next bit is just, I put in a few screenshots and quotes from the actual medical ships and their Q&As to add to that. So starting first with the Drake Cutlass Red, and this is from the the transmission comlink from when the Cutlass Red was released. Was it with 315? I forget when it was released. Anyway, and this is just a screenshot, but it says meet Drake's emergency response and support ship. Emergency response and support. That's the language is important. Persistent assistance, adventure support, more than just a top flight emergency responder, like if you're running little 911 calls in Stanton. The Cutlass Red is also highly regarded as a support vessel for hazardous combat, recon, and exploration. Dangerous missions become much less risky endeavors when medical support is a stone's throw away. They are blatantly telling you that if you're going to go and engage in something that is dangerous, to bring medical support with you, or to have it nearby, so that way you don't die, so that way you don't need to regenerate. It's not, they are highly encouraging you to do this. And even if you just bring a Cutlass Red, that's a completely viable option. It will save you money and it will save you time versus having to regenerate.
It was 3/8 December 2019.
3/8 December. Okay, yeah. So it was before 315, but it was when the Cutlass Red released. And that was back when the Cutlass Red could respawn, which is why a lot of the Cutlass Red comlink is actually incorrect, because it says that you can respawn there, which you can't anymore. but this part is still very accurate. It's also very accurate because you can, per what has been said about the Endeavor Hope class and the Hanger module on the Endeavor Hope class, the Endeavor with the Hope class, is that it can carry multiple or two Cutlass Reds. And so if we do get what I think we're going to get, you can just have your Cutlass Red bring you to an NPC Hope Endeavor class that's floating in the middle of this system, that doesn't have a landing zone, because there's going to be NPC organizations that do this sort of thing. Moving on to the Apollo, which is the sort of next step up. And this is from the com link for the transmission com link for the Apollo. The innovative modular layout of the Apollo's medical bays permits maximum efficiency and tailored levels of medical support to suit all levels of projected severity, while also supporting a more balanced configuration for patrol and general emergency response. So if you are going to Tiber and you're trying to recover something or attack a Vandal outpost or something like that, it's going to be dangerous. And the Vandal are ruthless. So there's a good chance that you could get severe injuries and that you might have the big die, but you don't want to go all the way back. Okay, so configure your Apollo with like a 1 tier 1 med bed and 2 tier 2 med beds, to support your squad of 6 or 8, that sort of thing. Because it's equipped with drones, it can be nearby and send the drones to come recover you, and that way you don't have the big die. You do get the treatment you need, but you're expecting more severe injuries. Or if you are having a bigger operation in a more um, settled system, and there are landing zones with hospitals nearby, with tier 1 beds or tier 2, or something like that, you might want to configure your Apollo, instead of being a small highly capable clinic, or an actual like emergency room. You want to configure it more like a upsized ambulance, and you just need to be able to treat more people and move more people back to where the definitive care is. you know you just want to keep them from dying and fly the 5-10 minutes back to the landing zone or something like that, so that way they can get the definitive care. But you want to be more efficient about it, instead of carrying what you need for regeneration, because it's not expected that you'll need to regenerate, or if they do have to regenerate for whatever reason, regeneration is nearby anyway. It's only a few minutes away. It's not worth going through the extra effort. In the Apollo brochure, it says new for, and this is just little screen captures that I've got that are in the show notes. And I don't have the brochure linked in the show notes, but you can just Google it and you'll be able to find it. It says new for 2948. Our patented Shepherd Medilift extraction drones are changing the face of rescue operations throughout and beyond the UEE. Utilizing a cutting-edge combination of thruster and tractor beam tech, each Medilift pod safely delivers critical patients to the ship when landing isn't an option. So, um, along with NPCs operating Cutlass Blacks, I would not be surprised if we see NPCs operating the full range of medical ships along with players in order to come and get you. Because the difference between, or sorry, Cutlass Red, the one of the big things is um, the Cutlass Red has a medium radar. The Apollo has a large radar. It can see a long ways the larger the radar, the further it can see or recognize your beacon where you're calling for help. And that's the big thing for it. And so you can be in these remote systems, and they're with limited medical support, and you can have support get to you quickly by activating your medical beacon. And along comes an Apollo and comes to get you, and you've got a high level of medical care or even definitive medical care, that isn't going to be far away or is within reach. um, and this is going to be part of your planning to make sure that that's available, or to coordinate it ahead of time, either with players or with NPCs. Sorry, I have to hydrate.
Hmm.
The next little quote from the Apollo brochure is, and this is supporting the first one. from the comlink, the innovative modular layout of the Apollo's medical bays promote maximum efficiency and enable tailored support to suit all levels of projected severity. Patrol and general emergency response configurations are also supported. The big thing is efficiency, and there's more to it later on in here. I think it's in the Q&A for something. You want to tailor the Apollo to what you're going to need. If you're using a tier 1 bed to hear tier 3 injuries, it will consume more resources. It is less efficient. And not only in that you have less beds, but it's also the beds are less efficient for treating those things because it's overkill. And so you want to configure your ship based off of what you're planning to run into, or who you're planning to support. If you're providing support to another organization, you want to make sure that you are configured for what they're anticipating to run into. But if you want to be the most profitable in doing what you're doing, you can just have 2 tier 1 beds, but you're going to end up using more resources, and that's going to cost you more money, and that's going to affect your bottom line. Just like if you go to a level 1 trauma facility, they will, in the US, they will charge you higher rates for things, even if they're simple, compared to a lower level hospital, because they have all these resources and they have to cover the cost of those resources, even though they might not be needed. And so we're going to get into I think that's where this is talked about more. A few questions in the Q&A for the Apollo. And sorry if this scanner anomaly is going long, but this is really important stuff, and this is a good summation of medical gameplay, medical logistics, and what regeneration is actually going to be like in Star Citizen. The first question: will there be any interactive doctor gameplay to healing in med bays and first aid, or will it be automatic based on the tier of healing? The design, and a lot of people seem to think that the med beds are just get the person in the med bed and they're going to be healed, and that's not the case. That's what this is talking about. The design for Doctor Medical gameplay is not fully signed off, but it currently has interactive elements to it. One of the things that we always want to do with Star Citizen is to make player interactions physical rather than just pressing a button and walking away. An example being the current mining loop that requires a level of constant control instead of automatic extraction. So right now, if you go watch the Banu Merchantman video, you will see that the med beds are going to be interactable. You're going to have to keep them stocked with the supplies that they need to perform the treatments that you're going to be doing with the med bays. It isn't just put the person in the med bed, keep it stocked, the med bed does the rest. No, it's going to be as interactive as mining. It's going to be as interactive as refining. When if you read about the refining gameplay loop, you're going to actually have to do stuff with refining. It isn't going to be set it and forget it like setting a refinery job at the refineries that are in game now. It's going to require active participation in order to get the job done.
Yeah, and we can always see a seed of that in just the medical gun where you have all these sliders. And you might want to do a certain amount of things with which drugs you're giving a person because of the blood drug level. You want to give the stuff they need, not just maybe not 100% of everything all the time. Because
you can use the automated part, but if you do so, you're going to vastly increase their blood drug level. And this isn't in game yet, but this is what we have is very simplified. It's going to get iterated on. But yeah, that's part of the whole thing is you want to maintain someone's blood drug level, low. You don't want to overdose them. Yeah. You want to give them what they need, not what they don't. Guess what? That's a real thing in medicine. Holy crap.
It will probably come down to a point where you have to choose, do I give them this drug that will help them with this thing or this one that will help them with this thing because you have not enough blood drug level overhead, but you have two different problems you need to solve. So you're going to need to balance that out. And that will be one of the active things to do.
And you're not going to need to know real life medicine to do this. You're going to scan the character, the player, whether it's an NPC or player, and it's the game is going to tell you that this is what they what they need, and then you just have to, like with mining, you have to give them what they need in the right amount. But if you give them the wrong thing, it will it won't help, or it could harm depending on what it is. And if you give them too much, you'll overshoot. And this is a concept that is, this is a thing in medicine. It isn't, it's very realistic, but they're making it in a way that the game will give you the information you need. You don't have to be an actual expert in medicine to do it, just like you don't have to know anything about mining in real life to mine in game.
Yeah, it's always good game design when you give the players all the information they need. Not all the information they want, but all the information they need to make the correct or incorrect decisions.
Yeah, and you just have to know how to follow the steps, follow the process, and respond to prompts with the right commands.
Right.
Next question: what happens to the player while they're waiting to be picked up, transported, and healed? Are they just sitting there doing nothing the whole time? Currently, the plan is for the player to be physically immobilized during pickup, transportation, and healing. Already, I don't think that's going to. We've already backed away from that in statements in ISC surrounding healing and why we have the healing beams. I do think we'll get more toward injections, where you have to actually get up next to the person and inject them with stuff. Like hypo spray. But I think it's a tech limitation now. But we'll finish the quote. We will review whether this is too much and if we need to provide some level of interaction. During these downtimes, we'll make sure the player has access to feedback, notifying them of their current state and an indicator showing them the rough time until the next state. What they have talked about, and this is pulling from bounty hunting, is that if you are captured and put into one of the stasis tubes, that your player will wake up in the facility that you're getting taken to. They've talked about doing something like that, and so I can imagine they could use the same thing. You're downed, you're injured, and you are immobilized until you get brought into the med bed, and then once you get in the med bed and you pick a destination that you want to get transported to, then you wake up at that destination, and the other player, if it is a player doing the mission, just has a copy of your body there, and they just, in order to get the payout, they have to complete the mission, and the payout will scale based off how well they complete the mission. Time, condition of the patient when you get there. um, so that's an easy way of getting around it, so that way players aren't overly inconvenienced. You're not just laying there on a med bed for 10 minutes while you're in quantum, getting to a landing zone or an Endeavor Hope class. But yeah, that's an easy way around that, and I think that's something like that will occur if you don't get definitive treatment at the site. What tier of beds will capital ship med bays have? Will they still rely on medical ship support? It depends on the ship in question, but a ship with a dedicated medical bay will generally have a higher tier bed to provide full medical support. It depends on the ship in question, but a ship with a dedicated medical bay will generally have a high tier bed to provide full medical support. Not highest tier, high tier. Weasel words.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no reason to think that a Carrack or a Banu Merchantman or an Odyssey or an 890 Jump will have the highest tier medical capability of a tier 1 bed with regeneration, because you have to remember, regeneration is printing an entirely new human with regeneration serum, and that regeneration serum is also used to replace organs and stuff like that when you have a severe injury. So it does not make sense at all that a tier 2 bed that cannot treat those high tier injuries could somehow print an entire human.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can use it, you should be able to use it to maintain your imprint. That makes sense, because your imprint is stored somewhere else where you would regenerate. All you're doing is updating it from a remote location. Because when you update your imprint crosses time and space, immaterial. It's this weird. The way they explained it doesn't make sense to me, but weird sci-fi stuff. But basically, if you're in your Carrack with your tier 2 bed, um, out in a system far, far away, and you update your imprint, um, it will just basically update the imprint where you have it stored, back at that, tier 1, that main hospital in the landing zone, or an Endeavor somewhere nearby, or something like that. It's updating your save point, but your save point is stored somewhere else until you move your imprint, or make until you move your imprint, or make a new imprint somewhere else that's capable. That imprint will stay. You're just updating it somewhere else. But that tier 2 bed might not make a high quality imprint, so it might just be a stopgap until you get back from your trip. So, yeah, but I also don't think, and this is a little bit more of a stretch, but I don't think an Idris or a Javelin will have tier 1 beds. I think they'll have tier 2 beds, and maybe even some tier 3 beds, because of the way medical logistics works. Because they will want to be able to maintain your imprint, and the majority of injuries will not be the big die, and they don't want to waste cargo storage space on regen serum, because they don't think they'd much rather have you regenerate back at some military hospital somewhere.
Yeah, and the logistics of each of those ships. Well, the Idris is sort of a carrier like, but it's a frigate. It's not very big. And then the Javelin only has one fighter, but most 99% of the crew is going to be inside the ship. So if one person gets injured, there's going to be a lot of people that's injured. So you can't fit a hospital for every person on board on the ship.
Yeah,
but
it would
Bengal,
be
Bengal has people.
might.
The Bengal has wings of people going out on dangerous missions. So that's 5 people per wing or so. I don't know the technicalities of those numbers, but if they get into a really bad time on a mission, they can come back and they can be rushed to the in-ship hospital. I think the Bengal would have a tier 1 bed.
Or it might have it would make sense for it to have a tier 1 bed, just like one tier 1 bed. But the thing is, you don't want lots of tier 1 beds, because if you do have a bunch of injuries and you're using tier 1 beds to heal those tier 2 injuries,
Yeah.
you're using up resources, because it's inefficient to treat lower injuries with a higher tier bed. And when you have limited resources on your ship, because you're not just carrying your medical supplies, but you're carrying everything else you need for that ship, for that journey. You don't want to carry stuff that you don't need.
Right.
And it makes more sense to stabilize someone and then treat them definitively when you get back to base, or to arrange for evac, Apollo medevac. That's what it's for. Or to evac back to a Hope class Endeavor, or maybe there's even a military hospital ship that isn't the Hope class. We don't know, but that's the way it works in real life, because it's more efficient, because it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to have a regen bed on your Javelin, when the overwhelming majority of the time you're not going to have people big die, because you can stabilize injuries with tier 2 medical beds.
That'd be a really
and
cool
keep people alive.
That'd be a really cool concept, having a Bengal dedicated to being a hospital, like the U.S. has. I forget is it the Hope? It might be the Hope. That basically converted warship that is just a hospital.
Yeah. It could, the military might use Hope class Endeavors. They might use something else. Don't know.
Hydrating is important. Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So let's see. Next question from the Apollo Q&A. Will there be a cooldown on respawns for an individual player, or will it be limited by the resources carried on the Apollo? This is important.
Mm-hmm.
There will likely be a cooldown period to promote the concept of death having serious consequences. And this is, I think, and this is a theory, I think this is why there are recovery beds in the Carrick, because after you have a procedure, after you regenerate, you're going to have, essentially have a debuff, from that procedure, for a limited period of time. And if you want that debuff to go away quicker, you can lie down on the recovery bed.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. They also show things like that in the Endeavor concept art. As well as in the Banu Merchantman that we've seen has recovery beds. And so it isn't, recovery isn't just going to be for a generation. It's going to be when you have a significant procedure. It's just going to be scaled based off of how severe your injury is, and the amount of treatment needed to heal it. Um, but yeah, so there will likely be a cooldown period to promote the concept of death having serious consequences, but it will also be limited by the medical resources carried on the Apollo. While you could respawn multiple times on the same Apollo in the same game session, the overall respawn amount will be limited by the resources that ship has available. Each spawn or recovery will use an amount of equipment consumables required for medical gameplay. So, that's the other limitation. If you bring tier 1 beds and you're treating lower tier injuries, you're going to burn through the resources you have on board more quickly. You won't be able to stay out as long, and it will mean that you can't treat as many people, and so it's just less efficient. It's not cost effective. It's just like with hauling. You want to take the right route. You want to tune your engines appropriately. Those sorts of things. You want to be, with medicine, you want to be as efficient as possible in order to treat the most amount of people as possible. That's what triage is for. Apollo triage.
Yeah. I think a slightly better analogy for current in-game mechanics is the subcomponents and modules and devices for mining.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
No, that's a really good analogy.
yeah.
Um,
Because Holy hasn't
what's
had
the
its re-up for it.
Yeah. What's the advantage of the Apollo in comparison to a medical bay you can find on ships like the Carrack? The Apollo's medical bay can hold more people than a non medical focused ship outside of some of the capital ships mentioned above, and its modularity allows it to heal in ways the vast majority of ships can't. So, your modularity allows you to get tier 1 beds, so you're going to be able to heal. If you have it configured that way, you can heal tier 1 injuries, unlike the Carrack. But again, expecting a tier 2 bed that can't heal tier 1 injuries to somehow print an entire human is highly illogical. That does not make any sense whatsoever. And there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the lore that suggests that. And even when they, actually, I'll get down to that here. Well, I'll just say it now. Even when they were the rest stop station clinics were on the roadmap, when they first came up on the roadmap, the release view, they were up there along with hospitals. I forget which hospital was first, but the hospitals said regeneration or respawn or regeneration, and the clinics did not. They changed it later, and they never confirmed. But I guarantee you, they changed it later because the game, the state of the game as it is right now, is too punishing for you having to go back to a landing zone every time you die. It doesn't. It's just too difficult. But you do have to update where your respawn point is, and that's in order to mitigate the fact that the game still has bugs. You still die from stupid shit, but at least if you take the time, you can go to the clinic and set your respawn at someplace closer to where you're operating than the full on landing zone. But they never said anything about changing respawn to include tier 2 beds, and that would be in stark contrast to everything that they have said thus prior. So, will tier 1 medical bays support everything the lower tiers do? Superior tiers will include all the functionality of lesser tiers. An interesting decision for the player will come in how they configure their bays. Having higher tier beds limits the number of people you can heal, and using them to provide lower tier healing could be a waste of time, space, and resources. We already talked about this. Our medical consumables, hoses, sterilized needles, Drugs, tools, blood, plasma, etc., stored in the med bay, or do they take up space in the cargo hold? Medical consumables must be stored in the cargo hold, but the plan is to balance it so that even on an intensive medical mission, you will still have room for regular cargo if you wish. On the flip side, you may want to run with minimal medical supplies to just offer a couple of healing sessions and instead attempt cargo missions to generate additional income that way. But yeah, that just says that the SCU on an Apollo will go a long ways. You'll be able to heal a lot of people, but that stuff isn't going to be cheap. Your regenerate. They told us earlier that the regeneration is costly. Regeneration serum itself is costly, and that's what's used to not only print an entire new human, but if you get a tier 1 injury and you need a new spleen or a new heart, that it's going to come out of it's made the same way. And so if you can avoid wasting that costly stuff, all the better. It means that your profit margins for those medical missions are going to be better. And so now we're moving on to the Misk Endeavor. And so the Misk Endeavor is a giant modular Misk ship from way back when. Who knows when we'll ever see it? It is John Crew's least favorite ship because it's modular and it's so huge. And because they promised a lot with it. But one of the ways it can be configured is what they called the Hope class, which includes a medical bay um, pod as well as a landing bay pod. So the medical bay pod is a large set of attached rooms which operate effectively as a standalone hospital, complete with operating theaters, recovery rooms, and more. Operating theaters and recovery rooms. So tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 beds and recovery rooms. So where you go, to lay down in order to remove that debuff from having those procedures. The Endeavor's medical bay is intended to operate alongside the optional landing bay, ferrying patients from battlefields and disasters for treatment and recovery. This is what the Cutlass Red is for, to take you to either a landing zone hospital or to definitive care at a Hope Endeavor class. And it's important to note that they said complete with operating theaters, recovery rooms, and more. If you go into any of the major landing zone hospitals, you can see that there are doors and elevators that tell you, hey, this is where the operating room is. The operating room is still a thing. We just can't open the door. The surgeon is an AI NPC character who haven't seen yet, but is being worked on. I think that the beds that we respawn in right now, in game in the hospital wings, are the tier 2 beds. I think that those are tier 2 beds, and that the tier 1 bed is an actual next level, much larger, operating suite where regeneration would take place, where major surgery will take place. That you aren't just going to lie down and click on the thing and it'll magically heal you up. That isn't how it's going to be. Those other areas in the hospitals weren't put there for no reason. And so it's important to consider that because they talk about that in the Endeavor and we all actually see it in game. And if you go to a space station clinic, it's just the little tier 2 beds. No regeneration. Not going to be a thing. Sorry. But ferrying, operating alongside the optional landing bay, ferrying patients from battlefields and disasters for treatment and recovery. This is what medical logistics is all about. This is why we're going to see Hope class Endeavors flying around in the verse, operated by players and NPC organizations, in order to bridge the gap between these star systems that are remote and lawless, or you know lightly populated and limited in infrastructure. We have these things in real life. There are very, very profitable companies that provide these services in real life in far-flung corners of the globe for people doing all sorts of things, whether it's exploring, mining and refining, for natural disasters and humanitarian operations, all sorts of different things. People just doing recreation. I imagine that there's going to be a Hope class Endeavor in, I think it's the Ellis system, when that really dangerous race goes on, where people crash and get injured because they're going to want to have significant definitive care that they're not only for the racers but for all the the people nearby. And Ellis is a huge system. It makes sense. That's medical logistics. The landing bay pod slings a single large hangar underneath the spacecraft, the Endeavour, and attaches it directly to other laboratory pods. Intended to support hospital operations, the landing bay has room to support multiple Cutlass Red ambulances and features complete decontamination facilities. Note that while the landing bay was designed to support ambulance operations, it also functions alongside standard science modules and can support the upkeep of any sufficiently small spacecraft. And so this is another engineering. It's an engineering comlink called the Design and Science, or Design, Science, and the Endeavor, or sorry, Design, Science, and the Endeavor. And so I just screen captured a couple of paragraphs from that are important to this conversation. And the first one is the ID beacon. And it says an ID beacon is a signal containing various bits of information that may either be broadcast from a ship offering a particular function or a player or ship requesting a specific service. The location of the ID beacon and its associated information can be selectively superimposed on a ship's navigational map of the local solar system, such that only those signals of interest are visible. A player that had to eject from the smoking remains of their ship might enable their personal ID beacon and designate what they're willing to pay for their rescue. And another player with a ship capable of retrieving an ejected pilot and listening for such signals would see it and have to decide whether or not the payment being offered is worth the effort. And assuming the stranded player was in a potentially dangerous area, the risk. That's what the medium radar and a Cutlass Red, the capital class radar on an Endeavor, the large radar on an Apollo are for, is to detect these ID beacons, as well as transmit their own beacon. Hey, I'm here offering these services. This is where you can find me. Or, you need this service. I detect you. I come get you now, based off how much you're willing to pay. And if a player doesn't, come get you, you can offer, you might be able to receive the beacon of an NPC doing the same thing and pay what they're willing to pay if a player isn't available. The medical module is another screenshot. And again, the link to this is in the show notes, which is where these screenshots are. The medical module outfits an Endeavor with all the equipment necessary to heal any injury or cure any illness that one might encounter while traveling from world to world. That alone guarantees that an enterprising player maintaining a presence in a popular area of space ignored by other Endeavors will see a brisk demand for their services. This is what medical logistics is. If you have a Hope class Endeavor or maybe in an Apollo, you're going to want to get that thing stocked up and appropriately crewed and go find a place where your services are needed, but you don't have a lot of competition. Where you're far enough away from landing zone hospitals and other fixed facilities, but also NPCs and players doing the same thing you're doing, that people will utilize the service that you're providing. Medical modules, however, fulfill an even more fundamental role within the service ecosystem. They act as remote spawn points for both players and some smaller ships. We'll see if you can end up spawning your ship there. Because they did talk about me being able to request a ship get delivered to the hangar, so that way it'll pop up. But we'll see. When a player dies, they have the option of respawning at any landing zone equipped with a hospital for a minimal charge. Landing zone equipped with a hospital, not clinic, hospital. Alternatively, one may inspect the prices being offered by all nearby Endeavors, and especially as well as an Apollo. I'm adding that in. It doesn't say that, but we know that an Apollo can equip a tier 1 bed.
Yeah, this was
being
posted
offered
before the Apollo existed.
Yeah, well before. Alternatively, one may inspect the prices being offered by all nearby Endeavors equipped with a medical module that have activated their ID beacons to determine whether a remote spawn in that ship, a concept that will often allow you to get back into the action a lot faster, is warranted. So everybody screeching, and I'm going to say screeching because that's the way it sounds to me when I read it, that the Carrack is an explorer, you're going to be in deep space, you need a tier 2 bed so you can respawn. You need a tier 2 bed or you need your tier 2 bed to be able to regenerate. No, you need a tier 2 bed in order to be able to manage and mitigate the injuries that you would likely see, and you'd be able to definitively treat the majority of what you're going to see while being out and exploring. Even if you get a tier 1 injury, the tier 2 bed can still treat it and stabilize you, and you can still continue to explore. You're just going to have a debuff until you can get to an endeavor or get to a landing zone or an Apollo with a level 1 bed. The only thing that it won't do is let you regenerate, and that's the consequence of this. If you were just able to regenerate and respawn, in your Carrick in orbit, there wouldn't be much consequence, for you doing something stupid down on the planet you're exploring, um, or out in the nebula or gas giant that you're, flying through in your Pisces. They want the consequence to be there. They want you to weigh the risks and say, okay, I think the risk is worth the squeeze. I'm going to go do this. And or because I have there is an endeavor, on the other side of the system, or I've contracted out with a Apollo that can respond and bring me back or something like that, or I can rendezvous with them. If I regenerate, that sort of thing. Chris Roberts and CIG want you to plan, and part of that planning is accounting for what we're talking about right now, what is mentioned in the lore, surrounding the endeavor. um, if an endeavor isn't in the system you're exploring, you might not want to undertake that really risky operation because you could big die. um, if an endeavor isn't in system, and it's a long ways away back to the system where your imprint is stored, you might not want to assault that, pirate base that's heavily defended, or you might not want to take on those Vandul or something. You're going to have to weigh these risks against the amount of planning that you've done, or plan in advance so that way you can take on these risks, based off of what you're expecting to encounter. So finishing that paragraph, when a player dies, they have the option of responding in any landing zone equipped with a hospital for a minimal charge. Minimal charge. It's going to be cheaper to respawn in a landing zone, to regenerate at a landing zone. It's going to be cheaper to get treated at a landing zone. But if you elect to get treated by an Apollo or an Endeavor way out in the middle of nowhere where they have brought the hospital to you, it's going to cost you more. This is that player agency, that choice that we talk about, that's part of medical logistics. Alternatively, one may inspect the prices being offered by all nearby endeavors equipped with a medical module that have activated their ID beacons to determine whether a remote spawn into that ship, a concept that will often allow you to get back into the action a lot faster, is warranted. After a player has respawned into the hospital section of an endeavor, they are granted access to a waiting room where they're able to order any of several smaller ships that will fit within the medical module's hangar bay. This is what they're talking about requesting a ship. The Endeavor's owner has to pay a premium for the rapid and remote delivery of such ships, and in turn is able to dictate the amount of profit that they require. Upon arrival of the ship, the respawn player and any of their party members that are also residing within the waiting room may enter the hangar bay, board the new ship, and continue on their way. Most organizations will want at least one Endeavor in their armada and will want to keep it nearby, but at a safe distance when combat looms. Again, medical logistics. If you're undertaking a dangerous operation, plan ahead. Either you use your own Endeavor or your own Apollo, or you use someone else's, or you ensure that those resources are provided by NPC AI, and the Quanta system. But if you don't plan, you're going to be inconvenienced. You're going to have an injury that's going to debuff you, and you're going to have to go a long way back to a hospital or clinic that can treat it, or you're going to if you big die, you're going to be really inconvenienced because you're going to regenerate someplace far away, if you didn't plan appropriately and you're doing something risky out in the middle of nowhere. And so I talked about the military rules of care, medical care, and trauma center levels. I've got those images in the show notes. You can Google those things and see what I'm talking about. The relationship is not by accident. If you think it's a coincidence, you're just being ridiculous. Um, but I also wanted to mention that two very important things are on the progress tracker in relation to all of this. The RSI Apollo literally just went into production in July. It is with the US vehicle content team. They are building the Apollo right now. Now that production sprint goes all the way out to the end of the roadmap, and so we won't see the Apollo in game until at least probably mid 2023 at the earliest. I think mid 2023 is probably a good bet because I imagine the Apollo arriving shortly after Pyro makes an awful lot of sense in order to bridge the gap with the lack of services available in Pyro, i.e., tier one, tier two beds. And it would make sense to have NPC, quantum AI operating Apollos as well as players in Pyro in order to provide these services and um, have it be a vibrant part of the economy as much as mining and refining and and hauling, bounty hunting, all that sort of stuff. The other piece that coincides with this is actor status tier two. Actor status tier one is what part of what led to medical gameplay tier zero. So tier two is what will allow, what will enable medical gameplay tier one, the next iteration on that alongside the Apollo. And so actor status tier two starts in mid December, goes the end of the progress tracker. So we probably won't see it again until, you know, 4.0, 4.1, something like that. Um, but it says actor status tier two looks at a variety of new elements such as hygiene, NPC status tracking, multiple bites, as in allowing you to take multiple bites of your food instead of just eating the whole thing at once, DNA integrity, DNA integrity. So think regeneration, medical insurance. So having medical insurance in order to cover the cost of treatment for these catastrophic injuries, or in the event that you big die, just like how we have insurance for our ships. It's the same thing. There's no difference. Cybernetic limbs and cloning. And it says cloning. I really think they mean regeneration, but it's coming. These aspects are going to be getting worked on more later on this year, going into next year, and they're going to be evolving. And so we're going to see a whole lot more of them.
I think
And
limb
get some of
cloning.
these. It could be limb cloning. It says cybernetic limbs and cloning. So it could be cloning limbs and organs.
Yeah,
That would
so
make sense.
instead of getting a robot or mechanical, even a sleek mechanical, you get a fleshy arm.
Yeah, you can get a fleshy arm or a cybernetic one. Yeah, because they've shown concept art for a lot of that stuff, and a lot of those look really cool. And to wrap this up, I thought it'd be interesting to because a lot of this conversation revolved around logistics and why logistics affects how this will actually work in game, medical logistics, um, and why this mirrors much of the way it's done in real life, and why they're designing the game and the ships to do what they do, as well as the hospitals and clinics and handheld medical gameplay. But I thought it'd be interesting to explore some of the places that it would be um, profitable profitable and interesting, challenging to provide medical support. Because if you're in Stanton, there's a lot of medical support in Stanton. You'll be, you can fly around in your Cutlass Red and get some jobs, but not much need for tier two and tier one beds in an Apollo or anything like that. It's a small system. There's lots of infrastructure here. It's like being in the United States, in a major metropolitan area. There's multiple, plenty hospitals and clinics, within range. Um, so I picked a few systems based off the lore surrounding those systems, based off how big they are, and based off what other systems they're connected to, that would be good for if you want to be if you want to provide medical support, you and your org want to operate an Endeavor or an Apollo, something like that. You want to do this sort of stuff. Kind of like there's a company called Remote Medical International. I took their remote medicine for advanced providers course, And this is what they do. They provide medical support based off, all over the world, in ultra remote third world locations. Um, and they basically assess what you're going to be doing and where you're going to be doing it, and tell you, hey, we will provide this level of medical support based off of the risk, that you're going to be incurring, and it's going to cost you this much. And there are other countries that sell insurance for this specific thing, and they're you can get insurance, and then they will coordinate your care in order for you to get rescued and treated and brought back to a actual hospital in an actual country with good medical care. This is a huge industry, makes a lot of money, and they do it for all sorts of things. So the first example, and this is sort of a light one, is the TAMSA system. And TAMSA is the largest system in the game, um, at 303 AU. It is over 60 times as big as Stanton. Um, and so basically anywhere in TAMSA, which is uninhabited, um, you are going to be far from a hospital. But the only thing is TAMSA is where that black hole is. Um, and so the only people in TAMSA are a bunch of explorers and people charting, doing scans, looking at the black hole, looking at the planets that are sucking it in. So there isn't a ton of risk for significant injuries or anything like that, but things could happen, and there's no medical support out there. So it might be worthwhile to bring your endeavor or something like that and station it out there to provide support to the explorers or the people supporting the explorers on these long haul treks to get to where they're doing all their scanning and sciencey stuff. um, because you're the nearest hospital is in Caselli, which is the landing zone on the Lorona, in the neighboring system of Banshee. So you're a long ways away from any medical support, even though the risk of injury or maybe it's illness, maybe you run into a probability volume of you docked with this NPC ship and you caught the flu and you need to get evac back. But just distance wise, that's a good place, potentially a good place to be. The next one is the Helio system. And so the Helio system has a landing zone called Mariana on the planet of Tangaroa. And Tangaroa is like an ocean planet, but it has massive volcanic and tectonic activity. So they have these big, huge waves. And then there's a few actual permanent continents at the poles, which is where Mariana is. And so that likely has a hospital and infrastructure. And so you could provide your medical support from there as your base of operations. But it's important because Helios as a system is 237 AU across. So even though there's a landing zone there, the system is massive. And so you're still, throughout most of the system, you're a long ways away from a landing zone and an actual hospital. And along with the system being massive, you have jump points into two lawless and very dangerous systems, Tyrannus and Tyrol, where there would be ample opportunity for you to provide more medical support. So maybe you go and get your supplies from the hospital at the landing zone, uh, on in Mariana, on Tangaroa, and then you go out and you go across the system and you're providing support in system, or you go to Tyrannus and provide support and do rescues there, or Tyrol and do the same thing. So that could be a good place to base your medical logistics, medical support organization. The next one is Ellis. So Ellis is also huge, not as big as the other two, but it's 101 AU across. But it has multiple habitable planets with at least one landing zone, maybe more. But because again, it's a vast system, you're a long ways from medical support if you need it, out in the outer reaches of the system. And there's also like 12 or 13 planets. And some of those planets are really dangerous for mining or for collecting gases. So there's a lot of industry. Ellis is where the racing, that there's a big race that goes on there, but the majority of the gross domestic product for Ellis comes from um, mining and producing raw raw resources. And though doing so in Ellis is actually a dangerous proposition. So those people need medical support, whether you're providing them treatment on the spot or bringing them back to one of the landing zones in Ellis on one of the habitable planets. There's a good deal of need there. It also has a jump point to Nexus, which, even though Nexus has been brought into the UEE, the Nexus system still suffers from significant lawlessness, despite efforts to restore law and order. And so, if you were based in Ellis, you could, and there's no work, well, you just make a jump and you go over to the Nexus system, and you're guaranteed to have some work there. There's always advocacy and UEE military operations to fight the pirates that are in Nexus. And then you also have a jump point to Tyrannus, which we already talked about, which is an extremely dangerous system. It's lawless, and has asteroid belts that and debris fields that are super dense. And so there's going to be a lot of people needing rescue. The last one, and this one is my favorite, and it's probably, and I'm going to give away my trade secret, but this is probably where I will be operating out of. This is the Oberon system. And the Oberon system itself is only 10 AU. But it lacks a substantial human settlement, because the only habitable planet is ice cold and barren. And so there's some human colonies underneath the surface, but they're really, really limited. And so those people on and that planet is called Uriel. And so those people on Uriel, a habitable planet in its own, don't have any, would have hardly any medical support, and it's certainly not high tier, probably not high tier medical support. Um, and it's a dangerous planet because it's so freezing and inhospitable with the storms on the planet. But more importantly, Oberon has jump points to 3 Vanduul held previously human occupied systems: Virgil, Kyber, and Caliban. And so there are humans who go into these systems and fight the Vanduul, try to who go on salvage missions to these previously human occupied systems with human occupied planets. Um, there's a lot of these are super risky, and you also have Vandal raids coming into Oberon. And so there's going to be a lot of demand for medical support because of not only how dangerous Oberon and Uriel is, but how dangerous the neighboring systems are that are only a few AU away when it comes to getting to those jump points. It's also has a jump point to Null, and Null is 120 AU across, and it is like basically the largest um, pirate system in the game.
Hmm.
And it's where it's home to slavers and smugglers and just basically the worst of the worst. When people think Pyro is bad, well, Null is Pyro's big brother. And there's not going to be any medical support in there. And it's a huge system. So you're going to have a ton of demand in very close proximity to Oberon, as well as in Oberon itself. And that's it for medical gameplay, death and regeneration, and medical logistics. And I really have to pee.